Hey guys, today we're diving into another truly horrifying case. If you want to support my channel, make sure to subscribe and stay active. It really helps me out. I'd be super grateful for that. Let's get started. People usually find a partner based on shared interests, hobbies, life views, and so on. Sometimes those preferences can be quite unusual, and that's exactly what makes some connections so intense. But what happens when two deeply troubled individuals, drawn to chaos, self-destruction, and cruel tendencies, fall in love with each other? They might not seek peace. They might look for someone else to pull into their dark world, someone to use in carrying out their most disturbing fantasies. The story of Aileen Seiden could easily be the plot of a chilling horror drama with elements of twisted romance. What started as a love triangle slowly unraveled into a never-ending nightmare, one Aileen simply couldn't escape from. She understood all too well that she was trapped. She even reached out to family members for help, but kept holding on to hope. She thought maybe things would get better. Maybe the man she loved would choose her. What she didn't realize was that he wasn't trying to choose between her and the other woman. The two of them had already made their choice, and they'd chosen Aileen, not as a partner, but as someone they had no intention of letting go. Early in the morning on April 23, 2018, a man named Ben and his wife set out for a quiet getaway to East Point, a small town in Franklin County, Florida. Their destination was a remote and picturesque area along the Gulf Coast, known by locals as the Lost Beaches. The couple planned to enjoy a relaxing day, some fishing, a picnic, and time together in what felt like a hidden paradise. As their car turned off the main highway and followed a winding, deserted road leading down to the secluded shoreline, they spotted something strange near the edge of the road. At first, they thought it was an injured animal, but Ben decided to stop and take a closer look. Stepping out of the car, he quickly realized it was something far worse. The lifeless, partially undressed body of a young woman, lying unnaturally twisted in the dirt, with visible signs of trauma. Terrified, the couple immediately called emergency services and waited at the scene for law enforcement to arrive. The woman had no identification on her, and the only piece of clothing she was wearing was a torn nightshirt. Her body was transported to a forensic lab, where she was classified as a Jane Doe, a term used when a person's identity is unknown, often in cases involving unidentified remains. The condition of the body was so horrific that investigators initially considered the possibility of a traffic incident. But questions quickly mounted. How did she end up alone on a desolate back road? Where was the vehicle that supposedly struck her? And why was she found barefoot with no belongings in such an isolated area? Soon, the truth took a much darker turn. The injuries were not consistent with a vehicle accident. Instead, they revealed the aftermath of brutal physical aggression and torment. She had multiple fractures, broken ribs, limbs, a shattered nose and jaw along with missing teeth. Her skin bore cuts, abrasions, burn marks, and several stab wounds. Several fingernails had been forcibly removed. Forensic specialists also confirmed that she had been subjected to an aggressive and deeply disturbing form of assault. Additionally, there were strange, circular, torn wounds on her body that experts couldn't immediately identify. The cause remained a mystery. Medical examiners estimated that she had passed away only a few hours before being discovered. And since there was almost no blood found at the location, it became evident that the crime had occurred elsewhere, and her body had been left at the roadside afterward. Authorities reviewed recent reports, but no missing persons matching her description had been filed in the area. With no leads and no identification, the investigation risked hitting a dead end before it had even begun. That same day, April 23rd, around noon, another distressing call came into the East Point Police Department. This time, it was from the owner of a local hotel. He reported that one of his housekeepers had walked into a room to clean it and stumbled upon something disturbing. Since it was immediately clear that the room might be the site of a serious crime, nothing was touched, and authorities were contacted right away. When officers arrived, they were shaken by the scene inside. The modest triple room, furnished with 2 beds, looked like it had been torn apart. Everything was in disarray, furniture overturned, items broken or scattered everywhere. The mattress on the larger bed was soaked in what appeared to be blood. and dark stains and splatters were visible across the floor, furniture, walls, curtains, and even the ceiling. Clearly, someone had tried to clean up before the housekeeper arrived. The heavy chemical odor lingering in the air and the numerous empty bottles of cleaning agents and bleach strewn around the room made that evident. But the attempt to erase the mess hadn't worked. So, whoever was responsible had likely poured chemicals over everything in a last-ditch effort to destroy evidence. Blood traces were also found in the bathroom, on the tile, fixtures, and even inside the tub. A curtain rod broken in half lay on the floor. Its jagged end was stained with dried blood. Forensic specialists would later determine that this plastic rod had been used to inflict the mysterious circular wounds found on the unidentified woman. It was used like a spear, to strike, jab, and pierce her skin. On the other end of the rod, investigators discovered a clear palm print. It seemed the person responsible either overlooked it or didn't have time to wipe it clean. There was no shortage of evidence in the room, but it was still unclear whose fingerprints and traces had been left behind, and whether the woman found on the remote roadside had any connection to this hotel. The front desk clerk checked the booking records and shared that the room had last been rented 2 days earlier under the name Aileen Seiden. But when staff were shown a photo of the unidentified woman discovered near the beach, none of them could confirm that she was the same person who had stayed in room 15. Still, police now had a name to work with, a possible identity for the victim. It would take just a bit of time to connect the dots, reach out to family members, and launch a full investigation. Soon, forensic analysis confirmed that the body did indeed belong to 31-year-old Aileen Seiden. Her only known relative, her sister, lived in another state and hadn't been aware that Aileen was missing. So who was Aileen Seiden? Aileen Katrina Seiden was born on January 20th, 1987, in the small town of New Jonesville, Tennessee. She was the younger of 2 daughters in a modest family. Her mother worked as a librarian, and her father was a school teacher. Aileen grew up alongside her older sister Francesca, who was 7 years her senior. When today's main figure was just 9 years old, her mother passed away after a long battle with cancer. Aileen and her sister were left in the care of their father, who did everything he could to provide for them. But 6 years later, tragedy struck again. He lost his life in a car accident. At the time, Aileen had just turned 15, and her 22-year-old sister Francesca became her legal guardian. Life wasn't easy for the 2 sisters, but the hardships they faced only brought them closer. After Aileen finished high school, they moved to Los Angeles together. Francesca found work at a local company, and Aileen enrolled in college. To help her sister, she also worked part-time as a waitress and delivery driver. Francesca recalls that her younger sister was always sensitive and deeply emotional. She cried often, took things to heart, and frequently talked about their parents. It was clear that losing both parents at such a young age had left a deep mark on her emotional well-being. Still, Aileen was hardworking, ambitious, and full of dreams for the future. Despite the love and care she received from Francesca, Aileen often felt alone. She longed to build a family of her own, to meet someone dependable and kind, to eventually have children of her own. Sadly, that dream would never come true. Aileen had always been slender, attractive, and sweet-looking, but when it came to her personal life, things rarely worked out. She had a few relationships here and there, but none turned into anything serious. Nearing 30, she made a bold decision to start over. She left Los Angeles and moved across the country to Tallahassee, Florida's capital. In her new city, Aileen found work as a real estate agent, rented an apartment in a nice neighborhood, and was doing quite well. She and Francesca didn't see each other often anymore, but they stayed in regular contact by phone and kept up with each other's lives. By then, Francesca had started a family and was expecting her second child. In Tallahassee, Aileen unexpectedly ran into someone from her past, a man named Zachary, or just Zach, Abel. They had gone to the same high school back in New Jonesville, and Aileen had a crush on him during her teenage years. Their paths crossed by chance at a cafe near an office building. They chatted, exchanged numbers, and soon began texting and calling each other regularly. It's worth noting that back in school, Zach had a reputation for being a troubled teen. He already had run-ins with the law even then. Still, he was good-looking, charming, and had a natural talent for winning people over. He knew how to earn people's trust, especially women's, and often relied on that charisma to get by. As an adult, he once again found himself dealing with legal issues, this time related to fraud. He had a suspended sentence on his record. It seemed like he just couldn't stay out of trouble or make an honest living. Zach was only a year older than Aileen, and though they hadn't seen each other in over a decade, it felt like no time had passed at all. Old feelings quickly resurfaced. Aileen believed she had finally found true love, that this was the man she had been waiting for to build her life with. But there was one major complication. Zach was already in a relationship with a woman named Christina Arauja, who was 5 years older than him. And breaking things off with her wasn't going to be easy. Zach and Christina had been together for nearly 4 years. They weren't just romantic partners, they also ran a business together, dealing in the sales and rentals of used cars. Their connection was more than just professional or emotional. They shared an interest in unconventional intimacy, had a fondness for partying, and were both heavily involved in alcohol and other prohibited substances. On top of that, Christina's father worked for the county sheriff's department. He was well-connected, respected, and held a position of influence. She often bragged that if any legal trouble ever came their way, her dad would make sure nothing stuck, that he could make problems disappear. After Zach started losing interest and tried to leave the relationship, Christina began using those very connections as leverage. She warned him that her father could easily have him locked up if she asked. Michael, a longtime friend of Zach who later testified in court, said that Zach was always the outgoing type, someone who could strike up a conversation with anyone. He had a knack for charming women and often pursued romantic flings by simply walking up to someone on the street. He was also known to target wealthier women, using their generosity to his own advantage. Zach's relationship with Christina had started out passionate and fast-moving. They quickly moved in together, launched a joint business, and things seemed to be going well on the surface. But according to Michael, Christina had been the dominant partner from the beginning. She managed their finances, handled business decisions, and dictated the rules of their daily life. Zach, as the saying goes, was completely under her thumb, whether he liked it or not. The couple spent a lot of time in local bars and clubs, where drinking often led to loud public arguments. Christina was extremely possessive, frequently confronting Zach about other women, demanding control and threatening him with her father's influence. Zach tried to leave her more than once, but never fully broke free. Maybe there was still some strange attraction between them. They were more alike than they cared to admit. In the spring of 2017, Zach introduced Michael to a new girlfriend named Aileen. Michael was surprised by the sudden switch and asked what had happened with Christina. Zach told him they had officially ended things. Aileen was the polar opposite of Christina, quiet, sweet, calm, and not the type to start drama or try to control a partner. But Christina wasn't ready to let go. At first, she swore she would ruin her rival. She bombarded Zach and Aileen with threatening calls and messages, followed them around, caused scenes in public, and even got into physical altercations with them. All of this took a toll on Aileen. It frightened and overwhelmed her, but Zach reassured her that he would take care of it. Despite everything, Zach and Christina still shared their business and saw each other at work every day. Christina refused to let him walk away. Eventually, her behavior shifted. She started acting surprisingly friendly toward Aileen. It seemed unnatural, almost unsettling, but Zach didn't seem to mind. In fact, he seemed to prefer it that way. He kept the business and now had both women, each afraid of losing him, and neither truly in control of the situation. In the summer of 2017, the company where Aileen worked abruptly declared bankruptcy and became the center of a high-profile legal dispute. All employees were let go. For Aileen, this was a major blow. She fell into despair. Without a steady paycheck, she could no longer afford the rent on her upscale apartment in a newly built complex and began frantically searching for new work. She spent about a week staying at her sister Francesca's house and even mentioned she was ready to move back to Los Angeles if things didn't turn around soon. But when Aileen returned to Florida, something unexpected happened. Zach and Christina offered her a job at their used car dealership. With no better options, Aileen agreed. On top of that, they also invited her to move in with them, and she said yes. She now lived and worked side by side with her romantic partner and his former flame, completely under their control. When Francesca found out, she was alarmed and urged her sister to walk away from it all immediately and come stay with her. But Aileen refused. She still held onto the hope that she and Zach would end up together, that eventually Christina would move on and leave them in peace. But that wasn't going to happen. Zach seemed perfectly content with the way things were. Meanwhile, Aileen's life was spiraling into a nightmare. Soon, the trio became regulars at local nightclubs. Their presence drew stares. People couldn't understand the strange dynamic. They drank together, acted provocatively, and Aileen appeared more like an accessory than an equal. At one point, she confided in a close friend, admitting she no longer felt safe in that house. She lived in constant fear and said she was being treated aggressively on a regular basis. Her friend immediately offered her a place to stay, and Aileen initially agreed, but then suddenly, she changed her mind. She said she wasn't ready to leave, that Zach had once again promised things would get better, and she wanted to believe him, but things only got worse. Aileen began to appear more withdrawn and visibly shaken. New bruises and marks kept showing up on her body, but outside of her friend, she had no one to turn to. And it was that same friend to whom Aileen finally revealed the full truth in the fall of 2017. She was being subjected to repeated mistreatment. It wasn't just about physical aggression or verbal humiliation. Zach and Christina had dragged her into their twisted world, forcing her to participate in disturbing acts and treating her more like a possession than a person. Despite all of this, Aileen didn't want to go to the authorities. She believed it would be pointless. Christina's father, with his connections in law enforcement, could protect his daughter, and if she did speak up, Aileen feared retaliation. Even after one particularly severe incident landed her in the hospital, she refused to press charges. Once discharged, she went right back to their home. This cycle of drinking, conflict, and exploitation dragged on for months, growing more intense with time. Everything reached a breaking point on April 5, 2018. After a violent argument and physical altercation with Christina, Aileen finally made the decision to run. What shocked her most was that Zach didn't try to stop her. In fact, he offered to go with her. The two of them packed only the essentials, and taking advantage of Christina's absence, left the house in a hurry, vanishing without telling anyone where they were headed. When Christina Araujo realized what had happened, she began bombarding the couple with phone calls and messages, full of threats and curses. She demanded they return immediately. Otherwise, she said, she'd go to the police and accuse them of stealing her car and taking money from the house. While exaggerated, there was some truth to her claims. Zach, clearly rattled, suggested they meet in person to talk things through. 3 days later, the runaways were in Texas. Christina made the trip out to see them. What happened next remains unclear, but somehow, this strange trio decided to patch things up and start over. They set off on a road trip, appearing over the next couple of weeks in bars and clubs across several cities, drinking heavily, getting into loud arguments, and occasionally even brawling in public. On April 21st, they returned to Florida. But instead of going home, they headed to the small, secluded town of East Point. There, they checked into a local motel, specifically Room 15, which would later gain tragic notoriety. The next day, Aileen sent a message to her sister saying her passport and all her money had been taken and that she was locked inside the room. She said she feared for her life, and then she went silent. That evening, just hours before the tragic events unfolded, the three of them were spotted at a bar. As usual, they had been drinking heavily. The following morning, Zach and Christina showed up at Michael's house, the same friend from earlier, and asked if they could crash there for a few days. They acted calm and casual. When Michael asked about Aileen, they claimed she had gone back to Los Angeles to be with her sister. Once law enforcement identified the victim and confirmed the identities of the primary suspects, they moved quickly. The pair were arrested the very next day at Michael's house, where officers found them asleep, curled up together on the couch in his living room. Both were stunned to see the police, and clearly hadn't expected to be found so quickly. They were taken into custody and held in separate cells for questioning. Each gave their version of what happened that night, and the stories couldn't have been more different. But both accounts were deeply disturbing. Zachary immediately claimed he was innocent. He said Christina was the one responsible for what happened to Aileen, and that it happened while he was asleep. According to him, they had all been drinking heavily that evening, and a fight broke out between the two women. When they got back to the motel room, the arguing escalated, and he says he eventually passed out from exhaustion and the alcohol. Zach claimed that sometime during the night, Christina woke him and asked him to check on Aileen. When he walked into the bathroom, he said he found her lying on the floor, unresponsive. He claimed he tried to revive her, but it was too late. Christina, he said, insisted that Aileen had fallen and hit her head on the tile. Panicked, they decided to take the body out of town and leave it along a remote road, hoping it wouldn't be found for a while. Zach also told investigators he wanted to call for help right away, but Christina stopped him, reminding him of her father's powerful connections. He said he feared that she'd pin everything on him, while she'd walk away protected by her family ties. But Christina's version of events painted a very different picture. According to her, Zach had not only been drinking that night, he had also used prohibited substances, which triggered a sudden outburst of rage. He allegedly attacked Aileen over a joke she made, striking her repeatedly. Christina admitted she initially joined in and hit Aileen a few times herself, but said the situation quickly spiraled into something far darker. She claimed Zach didn't just hit Aileen, he tied her up and began tormenting her, using his fists and a knife to inflict severe injuries. Christina said he assaulted her multiple times, later using various objects from the room. To keep Aileen quiet, Zach gagged her to prevent anyone from hearing the cries for help. The ordeal, according to Christina, lasted for about 4 hours. Eventually, Zach dragged Aileen into the bathroom and demanded she wash off the blood. When she couldn't even stand, he used the broken curtain rod to finish what he had started. Christina told investigators she helped dispose of the body and tried to clean the room only because she feared for her life. She believed Zach might do the same to her. She also claimed she was too intoxicated to fully grasp what was happening, that the alcohol clouded her judgment during the brutal assault. The couple returned to the motel room after dumping the body and attempted to clean up, but there was too much blood to conceal. In a panic, they poured chemicals all over the room in hopes of removing fingerprints and DNA, anything that could trace the crime back to them. Any illusion of love or loyalty between them seemed to disappear. Both pointed fingers at each other, trying to shift blame and downplay their own roles. Contrary to public expectations, Christina's influential father did not try to shield her. Once he learned the full extent of what had happened, he stated that both of them needed to face the consequences of their actions. The investigation dragged on, as it was difficult to determine who had done what. The 2020 pandemic delayed court proceedings even further. But in the summer of 2023, Christina accepted a plea deal. She admitted guilt in helping conceal evidence and taking part in the physical aggression against Aileen. Despite their cleanup attempt, forensic evidence remained, including DNA from both Aileen and the suspects. On the broken curtain rod, investigators found a clear palm print from Zach on one end and Aileen's blood on the other. Zach's attorney argued that he had been manipulated by Christina, claiming Zach only did what she told him out of fear of her father's influence. To support this, the defense presented surveillance footage taken near the remote location where Aileen's body was left. Christina was seen behind the wheel the entire time, calmly obeying traffic laws to avoid drawing attention. Zach testified that just a day before the tragedy, he had jokingly proposed to Aileen with a plastic ring he found in a cereal box. That small act, he claimed, sent Christina into a jealous rage, a moment he believed sealed Aileen's fate. Despite every effort to lessen his responsibility, in the spring of 2024, 6 years after the crime, Zach Abel was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Christina Arauja, who cooperated with the investigation, was convicted as an accomplice and received a 25-year prison sentence. Thanks for watching, everyone. Your support means a lot to me, and you can help my channel grow by hitting that like button, dropping a comment, and sharing this video. Your engagement really makes a difference. See you soon.